When you think big synth brands, Yamaha definitely comes to mind. They have so many devices though that sometimes entire lines of their devices get lost to the wind. Today we're talking about the slightly lesser known EOS line of devices. Now I'll contradict myself immediately by saying that this line existed for over 10 years, and in those 10 years it sold over 100,000 devices. These sales, however, were to a mostly Japanese market, so this is definitely lesser known in the rest of the world. Now let's talk marketing.
僕の曲を君の EOS で聴いてほしいな。簡単オールインワンシンセ Yamaha EOS B900 Yamaha.
This line was brought up as a simple interface with easy presets, easy to get people into music. It was meant for beginners to learn on. Even past that, once they had learned, it was meant to expand into. It was a device that was simple to use but also had a little bit of depth to it. The marketing of the time, however, was a little sexist. Some of the ads specifically said, "the synth for girls," implying that girls could finally use it because they couldn't before, so that's fun. Regardless, you could see this wasn't just selling a synth, this was trying to expand a market so that they could sell more in the future. And this is of course common. You'll get that within every company where they want to expand their market, get more people interested, then sell them the top of the line down the road. This is a common tactic. And with that said, let's look into the devices. Let's see what they started with. Let's see where they ended up. Let's kind of follow that journey of getting people in and then trying to expand upon it. So I want to group these. Group 1 is the 4 Op FM Synths. These are cousins to things like the TX81Z and DX11, but whereas those were seen as hard to program and too complex, this was meant to be approachable and usable off the bat. We start with the YS200, introduced in 1988 for 120,000 yen. This was a 4-op FM engine, 8 algorithms, 8 voice polyphony, built-in 8-track sequencer, and aftertouch support. Under the hood, it's pretty much a DX11, but Yamaha softened the language and interface to avoid scaring off newcomers. You could even load TX81Z and DX11 patches, but editing, a little shallow by default. Luckily for you nowadays, modern software like Edisyn unlocks its full potential so you can reach into some of those parameters that you otherwise wouldn't have had access to. There's really nothing lost here. Now here we meet our first main character, famous producer Tetsuya Komuro, known for using the more complex DX7, became the face of this synth. They wanted to take someone well established in the industry who had used the more complex stuff, show that, hey, you can approach this and sound like your favorite producer. And they needed as much appeal as they could get because this wasn't exactly cheap. It was more for the advanced beginner. We'll get into more of the solution to this issue when we start getting into how they were introduced into schools. Now released alongside this, the YS200's little sibling, the YS100. 1988, 102,000 yen, same sound engine, no sequencer, no aftertouch, a little cheaper. Now the YS200 and YS100 were full keyboard. We also have the TQ5, introduced in 1988, but for people who were short on space. This is just a YS200 confined into a tiny compact module, and it is weird looking. Then we move on to the B900. 1988, but released 3 months later in October. This was their gateway to get people in. You have a simpler interface, you have simpler keywords, now you actually need the market. It was again pretty much the same as the YS200, but this had built-in speakers and took center stage in the ads thanks to Komuro, who showed up in the ads playing this and smiling. Hip hip hooray. He would even show up playing it live on TV and in shows. In reality, he wasn't using the sounds from it, he was using it to control other keyboards, but he still played it and people saw that. Now for the B900 and the rest of all these devices I'm about to talk about with this similar form factor, they all have some common features. It's worth pointing those out now and not reiterating them. They all have the distinctive funky looking pitch and mod knob wheel, output, headphone, foot volume, sustain in, line in, MIDI in, out, through. Now I do want to call out about this device, it is heavy as sin. You know, screw being big, it's wide, it's bulky, cool. It is heavy, so if you're getting one today, you have to know that, sure, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, but also it gets thrown around like crazy and damaged. Make sure that you have insurance on shipping or that you know how to fix it. And with that aside, we get to the SDX2000. This is the same thing as the B200, but it's a school edition. Sell them in bulk at a cheaper price to schools, and now you have a whole new market. You introduce a bunch of kids to them. You say, hey, you want your parents to buy you these, or when you go off to buy musical instruments of your own, you're familiar with this and our technology, you're in our ecosystem. Voila. All the buttons and features were the same, but it did have a slightly different overlay that allowed for teaching school kids, and then they also released some teaching books alongside it with a lesson plan like go through this, teach that. And then off on its own, we have the DS55. It doesn't share that common form factor of the B200 into the later B500 700, also released in 1988, but a little bit of an aside. Note that you'll see this as DS55, but you'll also see it as EOS DS55, so yes, it is part of the EOS line, it just sometimes doesn't appear that way. Functionally, it's just a repackaged YS100 with a couple other niceties. It's 4 Op FM, 8 algorithms, 8 voice polyphony, digital delay and built-in arpeggiator, battery powered and portable, lacked card slots unlike its siblings, 43 pre-programmed sequences. And that about marks the end of Group 1. I do want to take a stop for a quick PSA about the voice cards. All of these 4 Op FM synths, the YS100, YS200, B200, and TQ5 share cards, but not the DS55. Further, when you're looking at the cards, they have a tiny A-B bank switch that's on the very top. It's stiff and often overlooked. The bank B doesn't contain anything generally, and it's not going to work, so sometimes you'll see cards where they say, oh, don't work, or somebody's confused. Switch it back to the A, and suddenly it starts working again. Sometimes it just gets knocked over. I've seen too many people toss perfectly good cards because of this and be very confused, and I would love to help, so this is the PSA. And one more side note before we move on, I did want to mention Edisyn control specifically. If you're diving into these FM models today, Edisyn's a lifesaver. There's full editor support for the YS100, YS200, B200, and TQ5. Not so sure if the DS55 works in there, but altogether this makes editing way less painful and the device takes on a new life. So without further ado, into Group 2. These I'm calling the mixed waveform hybrids. We start with the B500, released in 1990 for 168,000 yen. This was EOS's biggest hit. It released just after TM Network dropped their album Rhythm Red, which became the synth's flagship demo. Komuro, our main character, naturally fronted the commercials. Fun fact, of course, they didn't use this device to record the album, but he did demo his album on the device. Now, the B500 introduced PCM waveforms alongside FM. So it had 128 AWM waveforms plus 256 FM waves. It had a 9-part sequencer, 8 instruments plus rhythm, 34 multi-effects, 24 voice polyphony, and then 128 presets plus 100 user slots. Now this and all the rest of the devices I talk about do have a pitch and mod knob, output, headphone, foot volume, sustain in, line in, MIDI in, out, through. Interestingly enough, the Yamaha SY99 came out in 1991, and you can find later ads for this device saying it rivals the SY99. Personally, I think it sounds more like an SY22. It's not a bad thing, it was just a weird comparison for their ads to make. You have a lot of those lo-fi, gritty tones. It's not really high and crisp, and actually if you do a comparison of the waves that are in both models, you'll see some overlap. You can look forward to a future video where I compare the waves of the SY series to the waves of the EOS line, and we listen to them together. That is not for today. Next up is the B700 in 1993 for 170,000 yen. This was the same PCM plus FM engine, 28 voice polyphony, 100 presets plus 100 user spots, 9-part sequencer. Now, TMN had disbanded, so Komuro's demos pivoted towards TRF and Globe here. For reference, those are bands that he worked with. As part of his solo stuff, him and a couple other famous musicians did work on a song called 22nd Century, which was completely recorded on the B700 for real this time. Related to this, people were convinced you could get the samples to make the song as presets. There were rumors swirling about special samples exclusive to certain store releases thrown in there, so based on where you were buying it, but this is likely overblown and not true. The 90s was just this time of these kind of fun one-off rumors exactly like this. And the note on the cards here, the B500 and B700 cards are interchangeable, but due to waveform differences, the sounds might not translate cleanly. So yes, you can play it, but it might sound super weird. Now another aside here about Edisyn, sadly no support. I tried tricking it with the SY22 controls and some other Yamaha stuff, but no dice. It's open source, so I could go in and edit the software, but I haven't gone that far yet. It might be as simple as just changing the ID for the synth or something, but time will tell. And with that, we move on to group 3. I'll call these the digital workstations. This is not to say that in the previous devices you couldn't use it as a workstation. Yes, you had this sequencer ability, but here we really see that full-blown as a true workstation. We start off with the B900. Released in 1995 for 189,000 yen. Now for those of you familiar, this is basically just a QY300 packaged in a keyboard. The QY300 came out in 1994, so this was right after. It used the Yamaha AWM2 technology, so all PCM, no FM. In addition, it has a 16-part sequencer, 32 voice polyphony, floppy disk storage, so no more of the old cards, effects blocks, and then XG/GM compatibility for the sounds. Now, sad news time here, the effects won't play when you're playing the XG sounds. Just an important note. Now, as for those effect blocks, we have 11 reverb, 11 chorus, 42 harmonization effects. You can have 3 at once, and you can assign functions like a filter to the scroll wheel. There's 768 preset sounds, 21 drum sets, 28 user voices, 1 user drum set, 10 user songs, 800 preset patterns, 800 pattern storage places, which is 100 patterns across 8 tracks, and it gets confusing. There's a lot of sounds and a lot of memory. There's also 128 preset voices. I will then of course mention the pitch bend wheel, the mod wheel, the volume slider, and the data entry dial, plus the 260 by 64 dot graphic LCD if you ever need to replace it. There's line in, line out, headphone, foot volume, sustain switch, MIDI in, out, through, just like the other devices. Now it is worth noting that in this base model, they're essentially the same sounds as the MU50, except they have some additional sound effects. This is also where we follow up with the devices for schools. We have the SDX2000, which is the equivalent re-release for schools, of course with a different overlay for teaching. And it's worth finishing up talking about the school line. We have the SDX4000, which is the follow-up for schools, but it's actually just a rebranded MO6 Motif model, so the Motif is the direct follow-up to this series. So this is where our second main character comes in. You'll find a bunch of videos of him programming this and using the sequencer, etc. He was essentially a second rep person for this. Him and Komura were working together, and he actually helped design the preset voices for this as well as the preset songs that went on it. Specifically, together they worked on the upgraded sounds that went in the EX model in December of 1996. It looks mostly the same, but it's blue now. It has some new demo songs, new presets, and some of the tones were changed out with higher quality ones. Now, I did mention before that this is the change to floppy disk, so the old cards of course won't work. I didn't have luck making the B2000 card work in this one, and vice versa, where the 900 card didn't work in the 2000. I can't completely confirm that it doesn't work, but it didn't work for me, and I think it's just because the floppy drives were failing. The lesson, of course, is floppy drives suck unless they're inside my Taisho Kodo. And then we get to the B2000, April of 1998 for 248,000 yen. This is again just a fancy QY700 rather than the fancy QY300. The QY700 came out in 1996, so again just a little after. Now we also have a sampler function and an arpeggiator, which the previous versions didn't have, nor did the QY700. The sampling is the same as the Yamaha SU10. It holds 11 seconds of data, uses the front AD gain for the level control, and can assign multiple samples to the front pads. There's a pad assignment section you can click into where you can actually assign the sample pads to certain notes. It's slightly confusing if you think that note will trigger the sample. This assignment is the note that is sent out via MIDI when you hit the sample pad. It allows for MIDI triggering on the other end. Other notes are max polyphony of 64. The sequencer data is not saved on power off, so save it to the floppy disk. This is different from the QY700, which could save it. Now back to our main character, Tetsuya Komuro. In 1998, TK was using it on tours, so lots of presets will have the TK in the name, like TK Piano and TK Hit. In 1999, they changed the face of the product to Asakura, our second main character, so he was on all of the ads, but the presets remained TK. Now this made some sense, as the B900 seemed to not perform great because people didn't want to sound like that era of Komuro's music. They were trying to get a little distance from that sound, get a new face to the product. Now, Komuro's ask was an octave up and down key tone control knob, and he's wanted sampling in these ever since the EOS B700, so they finally added it. And then, oops, after the 2000, he's off. After the B2000, there was one follow-up with the B2000W in December 1998. It went from a metallic gray on the base model to a pearl white, hence the W for white, and the demo song was replaced. They stopped selling the B2000 in 2007. And then to reiterate here from the previous section, I didn't get the B900 cards working here, but it may have just been the fault of a bad floppy reader. So this marks the end of the digital workstations, and then we're on to the final group, which is only one device long. It's the forgotten future. We have the EOS Bx or B10, which came out in 2001. They started to see the approach of using computers for sequencing, so the Bx model has sequencing inside it, but not great support. There was extra software provided that made it a lot easier. There is a sequence, however, built in, and the demo song shows it off. This one has no built-in speaker and no sampling. It does have a USB terminal, optical output, and smart media card slot. This is right in line with Yamaha of the time. The SU200 used the same thing. It also has a rotary encoder, 480 XG presets, 128 presets, and 20 drum voices. You can then save 128 user voices and 2 drum layers when editing. Then there's 520 total waves to choose from when you're making your voices. It is very lightweight, it looks good. All these things aside, it didn't last very long. It was discontinued in 2005. Also of note, when you're looking at material for this one, Asakura was the face of this one completely, so you'll see some videos of him using the device and showing off its sequencer. And that about does it. The only info you're really missing are the different voice cards that you could get for the devices. I'll pop up some lists of the lines they were available on and the different voice cards you could get. Now with all that boring information out of the way, let's take a look at some demos. These are pretty compact demos showing the basic functionality of the devices. Since these are full-fledged synths, I can't get everything in, but I am and have been releasing lots of videos over the specifics. All the voices, all the presets, all the everything. So check the channel, check the playlist, and you'll see more if you're interested.